In the world of football, the term defunct covers an array of meanings that all indicate a football club no longer existing. Essentially, a defunct football club is one that has either folded, been dissolved, or merged with another side. A club's disappearance carries a different emotional weight depending on who you ask and where they grew up. Asking someone from Liverpool about their love for Rushden Diamonds might raise an eyebrow, but around Northamptonshire or even Peterborough, you'll easily find people with memories of watching Rushden and Diamonds before they became defunct in 2011. If you've been following the channel for much of this year, you'll know we've explored numerous football clubs that have become defunct, from Rushden Diamonds to Chester City, from Macclesfield Town to the British Ladies Football Club. It's been one of, if not the most successful mini-series I've made to date. However, as we've explored defunct football clubs across 3 parts, there's another side to this phenomenon. The clubs that almost met the same fate. Across the UK, communities have been unlucky enough to lose a part of their history and heritage when a club shuts down, but others have been far luckier, saved right on the brink of extinction. More recently, during the 2025-26 season, we saw 2 major scares closer to home, Morecambe and Sheffield Wednesday, both left in severe financial and ownership crises. Fortunately, both clubs continue to operate and fight their way upwards, proving that fortune does indeed favour the bold. So today, we'll be exploring those stories, the clubs across the UK and Europe that came dangerously close to becoming defunct, but for one reason or another, were saved. And if you'd like to explore my previous videos on defunct football clubs, feel free to check out the playlist before watching this one. If you enjoy this kind of content, and maybe have stories of your own local club struggles, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Number 1. Portsmouth. Within just the 21st century, plenty of football clubs have been run through the mill, some taken advantage of, others completely neglected. However, few stories are as turbulent as that of Portsmouth, whose journey to the brink of extinction is a literal rollercoaster. In 2008, Portsmouth lifted their first major trophy since the 1949 51st Division title, winning the FA Cup under Harry Redknapp. Funded by Alexandra Gaidamak and boasting an experienced squad featuring Sol Campbell, David James and Lassana Diarra, Pompey won 1-0 over Cardiff thanks to the ever-reliable Kanu. It was a statement of intent, proof that with the right people and the right momentum, anything was possible. But the good times didn't last. The following season, Pompey played in Europe against the likes of AC Milan and Wolfsburg, but the cracks soon began to show after Redknapp's departure to Tottenham Hotspur in October 2008. Tony Adams replaced them, but results faltered. They finished 14th. Not disastrous, but far from their previous heights. Then came the 2009-10 season, when everything fell apart. Portsmouth went through multiple managers, mounting debt and a string of ownership changes. Gaidamak had sold the club in 2009 to Salman Al Fahim, but after only 6 weeks in charge, Al Fahim sold it again to Ali Al Faraj amid financial uncertainty. Under Al Faraj, wages weren't paid, and by February 2010, Portsmouth entered administration, receiving a 9-point deduction, the first Premier League club ever to do so. Relegation to the Championship soon followed, but the nightmare wasn't over. Over the next 2 years, ownership chaos continued. The club changed hands again, this time involving Vladimir Antonov through the CSI Group, whose arrest in 2011 over alleged asset stripping left Portsmouth back in the administration. By 2012, debts had climbed to around £58 million, and liquidation loomed. The club dropped into League One, beginning the season with a 10-point deduction, barely able to field a team. Then came salvation. In April 2013, the Portsmouth Supporters Trust completed a historic fan takeover, rescuing the club from liquidation. Over 2,300 fan shareholders contributed financially, and a wall of fame was later unveiled at Fratton Park to honour those who helped save their club. By April 2014, Portsmouth had cleared all its debts, an extraordinary turnaround. If it weren't for those supporters, there simply wouldn't be a Portsmouth Football Club today. Now back in the Championship, Pompey stand as one of English football's greatest survival stories, a statement to what happened when fans, not financiers, decide the fate of their club. Ownership management caused a fall. Weak governance allowed it to happen. And if you ask me, maybe even a bit of Harry Redknapp's famous wheeling and dealing didn't quite have the same magic this time round. Number 2, Leeds. The desire and aspiration to turn a football club into a world-leading juggernaut can never be faulted. However, it should never come at the expense of a downfall fueled by massive debt and multiple relegations. Not to mention the opportunity to be owned by Ken Bates, but we'll get to that soon enough. Former chairman of Leeds United, Peter Ridsdale, took charge in 1997, acting not only as chairman, but as the public face of the club's ambition. Leeds finished 5th in the Premier League, already boasting players such as Nigel Martin, Harry Kewell and Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank. Ridsdale's aim was clear: to make Leeds a major force in both English and European football, and to invest to compete with the very best. Interviews like these would fill any fan with excitement. The signings that followed reflected that ambition. £18 million on Rio Ferdinand, £12 million on Robbie Keane, £11 million on Robbie Fowler, and around £7 million each for Olivier Dacour and Seth Johnson. But the question looming over Ridsdale's project was simple: how was this level of spending sustainable? The answer was the Champions League. Leeds' financial model was built on the assumption that they would qualify every year. When that didn't happen in the 2001-2002 season, the entire structure began to collapse. Debt repayments ballooned because the club had borrowed against future Champions League income.
We have spent so heavily in the past? Probably not, but we lived the dream.
Cash flow evaporated. The board was forced to sell star players just to stay afloat, starting with Rio Ferdinand to Manchester United for £30 million. Every sale weakened the team on the pitch and results suffered. The signing of Seth Johnson became symbolic of the overspending. Leeds overpaid for him, placed him on wages of around £30,000 a week, and due to injuries, he made only 54 league appearances across 4 years. He was a luxury signing at the time, when the house was already on fire. What followed was a steady slide down the league ladder, from European contenders to mid-table to relegation battles. And finally, relegation in 2004. A revolving door of managers followed David O'Leary, Terry Venables, then Peter Reid, each tasked with slowing a collapse that was already in motion. Then came the unthinkable. Leeds were forced to sell Ellen Road and their training ground, Thorpe Arch, and lease them back just to keep the club operational. For a club of Leeds' size, selling its own stadium was almost unprecedented. A few years later, it caught up with them. In 2007, Leeds entered administration, were handed a 10-point deduction, and dropped into League One for the first time in their history. A fallen giant, undone by a gamble that relied on Champions League football forever. If there is a lesson to be learned from Leeds during this time, it's this: financial fairy tales always end, especially when Ken Bates is sitting at the story table. Number 3, Dortmund. Now this is news to me, but if you told me yesterday that of all clubs, Dortmund was near defunct, I would have to slap you silly and rename you as Billy. The 2004-05 season presented Dortmund as still one of the most respected and ambitious sides in the Bundesliga. Thomas Rosicky wore the bright yellow colours before his move to Arsenal in 2006, and Jan Koller was their top goal scorer with 15 goals. They finished 7th, and the following year, they again finished 7th, but with a massive tryst during that season. It was reported that in March 2005, Dortmund had debts in excess of £154 million, over €200 million. In football, to be the best, you have to beat the best, and to beat the best, sometimes you have to spend like the best. As such, Dortmund tried to spend like their biggest rivals, Bayern Munich. This came after winning the Bundesliga in 2002 and reaching the UEFA Cup final. Big fees for Marcio Amoroso, a German record at the time, Koller, Rosicky and Everton paved the way for Dortmund to consistently compete at the highest level. Like Leeds, Champions League revenue funded it all. The Westfalenstadion was enlarged for the 2006 World Cup, financed through high-interest loans and a sale and leaseback arrangement, making it a long-term financial trap and a half. And as if missing out on Champions League football in 2003 wasn't bad enough, their shares on the stock market crashed, making it near impossible to raise funds. With the club literally days from going defunct, local banks extended credit. Jan-Joachim Watzke restructured the entire financial model of the club in 2005, and a very helpful and generous club in the name of Bayern Munich, Dortmund's biggest rivals, lent them emergency funds. I suppose when it comes to losing your football club and being in debt to your fiercest rivals, some things really are more important than rivalry. Number 4, Southampton. Parachute payments are possibly, in my opinion, one of the sleaziest and most unfair things the Premier League has implemented since its introduction in 1992. If this is a new phenomenon for you, then essentially, a parachute payment is a financial safety net paid by the Premier League to clubs that have just been relegated, designed to soften the financial blow of dropping out of the top flight. Words can make people think and feel things differently, but to me, it is a way for established Premier League teams who are unfortunately relegated from the top tier to have an economic advantage, being given a large sum of money to pay for a variety of things. However, it's taken a while for this sum of money to reach astronomical levels, as it originally was just modest support, around 1 year's worth of partial TV revenue. Unlike now, where sums can reach over £50 million. This is the primary reason behind Southampton's near-defunct status in 2009. When Southampton were relegated from the Premier League in 2005, hello again Harold, it signified the end of a 27-year top-flight run for the Saints. With this came the realisation that a Premier League squad, taking home Premier League wages and repaying a new stadium built only 4 years earlier, was going to come at a cost, significant debt. Understandably, when fans fork out a chunk of their weekly budget to watch 22 people kick a ball on a pitch, they stop watching when it doesn't result in good entertainment or even 3 points. Attendances drop, leading to lower revenue. What didn't help with the status quo of relegation was that, in Southampton's case, the stadium loans and high wages remained, as well as ownership instability and poor leadership that followed. At this point, the club was controlled by Rupert Lowe, the longtime chairman whose decisions had already made him unpopular with fans, from managerial sackings to inconsistent spending. With so many dominoes coming into play, it was in 2008 that Southampton Leisure Holdings plc, the parent company that owned the football club, ran out of money. They went into administration in April 2009, which resulted in the club being penalised, even though it wasn't technically in administration itself, resulting in a 10-point deduction that was carried into the 2009-10 League One season. Southampton were already relegated from the Championship at that point, but this deduction meant they start the new season on the back foot. They were going to represent the third tier for the first time in 50 years. By the time 2009 rolled around, the club was in debt estimated at around £30 to £40 million. They had unpaid wages, tax debts and creditors circling. In order to keep the lights on, players were being sold off and staff were laid off. It became even more serious, as if it wasn't already, when administrator Mark Fry said at the time, quote, "If a buyer cannot be found soon, the club will not be able to complete its fixtures," end quote. It was at this moment that Southampton were looking at the possibility of folding entirely. In summary, the club was saved by the Liebherr family in July 2009 for a fee of around £13 to £15 million. Markus Liebherr, a Swiss-German billionaire, not only bought the club but cleared immediate debts, secured the club's future, allowed them to retain staff and rebuild, and restructured the finances under solid ownership. Tragically, Markus Liebherr passed away in 2010, but with his family carrying on in his legacy, the youngest football fans can fondly remember not only Southampton's rise back to the Premier League, but also how it became one of the best run football clubs in the top flight during the mid-2010s. 5. Valencia. Heading over to Spain for our last club, few will be surprised to hear of all the clubs who have nearly become defunct. Aside from Barcelona, turns out Josep Bartomeu was a bit too late to make that happen. Kind of like a villain from Scooby-Doo if you ask me. It was Valencia who had internal issues. In the early 2000s, Valencia were one of Europe's elite clubs. Under Hector Cooper and later Rafa Benitez, they reached 2 consecutive Champions League finals in 2000 and 2001, won La Liga in 2002 and 2004, and lifted the UEFA Cup in 2004. The club was competing toe-to-toe with Real Madrid and Barcelona. However, if this video has taught us anything about elite clubs becoming prone to folding, it is that when success is bred through ambition, debt can be brought into the mix. A plan to expand the new Mestalla was led by President Juan Batista Soler. Envisioning the home of Valencia would host 75,000 fans. It was a plan which would symbolise Valencia's status as a European superpower. Financed through bank loans and the sale of the old Mestalla site, construction began in 2007. However, similarly to Southampton's demise in 2008, the global financial crisis also affected Valencia, bursting the Spanish property bubble. Not only did house prices plummet, construction companies go bust, banks would get left with toxic property debt, and credit become dried up, but in Valencia's case, the planned land sales never materialised. By this time, Valencia had a half-built stadium with no money left to finish it, which consequently coincided with paying large amounts of interest on the enormous loans they agreed to. Fast forward a year later, Valencia were looking at a debt of over 500 million euros. Construction on a new Mestalla was suspended indefinitely, leaving behind a massive concrete shell that still stands today as a reminder of their hubris. Consequently, their biggest stars were sold to keep the club operating to some degree, such as David Villa to Barcelona for 40 million euros, David Silva to Man City for 30, and Juan Mata to Chelsea. By 2013, Valencia were effectively owned by a bank, Bansaya, their main creditor, which had no desire or capacity to run a football club. In hindsight, it was a highly controversial figure who ultimately saved the club from obscurity. Peter Lim, a Singaporean billionaire businessman, bought Valencia in 2014 in a deal that effectively wrote off the club's immediate debt. Today though, Peter Lim is a figure who is not only undesirable around Valencia, but also one who has been heavily criticised by fans for financial mismanagement and sporting decline, leading to protests and a fractured relationship with supporters. It was him who saved Valencia from insolvency. And before we finish off, let's polish off how these clubs are doing today. As already mentioned in the beginning, Portsmouth are now in the Championship and are owned by Michael Eisner, the former CEO of Disney. Leeds were recently promoted back to the Premier League under Daniel Farke and have a minority equity investment by Red Bull. Dortmund have become more so of a hub for young talent to become global superstars and big players for clubs since 2005, such as Mario Götze, Marco Reus and Erling Haaland, which is nearly the same with Southampton in terms of developing young talent such as Luke Shaw, Adam Lallana and James Ward-Prowse, though recently have become a potential yo-yo club between the first and second tier of English football. And finally, Valencia. Construction on a new Mestalla officially resumed in 2025 after a 16-year halt. They secured 322 million euros financing for the stadium project, giving them a real shot at completing the stadium by 2027. However, that said, costs are rising. An audit suggests the stadium could be 70% over budget, increasing risks again. And that's it. Thank you if you've made it this far. And if you'd like to help out more, you can like and subscribe for other football content I make. Right now, as I approach 1 year on YouTube, I'm a small YouTuber, and every like, comment and subscription to the channel means the world to me. So with that, like, comment, subscribe, and as always, I will see you soon.